A couple of months ago, we were together in a global convening around the World Coalition Against the Death Penalty, where we're trying to interrogate also the same issue. So you are right that the concerted efforts jointly by all civil society partners in the room and also outside continue to ensure that we drum up support towards abolishing the death penalty. This half-day meeting marks the 21st day, the 21st World Day Against the Death Penalty, which will be celebrated tomorrow. Tomorrow is 10th of every October, we celebrate the International Day Against the Death Penalty. And this year's theme is Death Penalty and Irreversible Torture. I think it captures the spirit of the speech by the Honorable Member of Parliament, but also the sentiments of many people in this room. This day also marks an appreciation that many around the world, in the region, but also in Kenya, are calling for its abolition, that is the death penalty. In its very nature, we argue that we cannot ignore the death penalty conversation because it violates human rights. I think for all of us here who are justice sector actors or human rights defenders, we believe that the death penalty violates the right to life and the freedom from cruel, degrading, and inhuman treatment. As has been said, those serving the death sentence are experiencing mental and psychological torture. The right to life, in our view, is an inalienable right that no person or the state should be allowed to take it away. This year's theme, as we've said, captures those sentenced to death, what those sentenced to death have to endure. We are calling for the abolition of the death penalty. It doesn't mean that we ignore the plight of victims of crimes that have been committed. No. We are just saying that there are alternative ways within the penal system that can have different forms of punishment that don't necessarily call for the death penalty. I hope in our conversations today, those are the issues we'll be able to explore and see how we move forward. Allow me to highlight also what is increasingly emerging as a critical focus for us here at ICJ Kenya. I was delighted to hear the statistics about those in prisons, 99 men and 2 women. As of December 2022, our own statistics that we received from prison, and perhaps because of the commutation, were that there were 22 women serving the death sentence, of which 2 had been convicted of robbery with violence, and the other 20 were for murder. So perhaps then we can compare notes in terms of statistics, because one of the areas we need to work together as civil society is what are the figures and the statistics that are in our prisons at the moment. The 99 versus 2 for us then raises the question, what the 2 women, what are they convicted of? And for us at ICJ, we began a campaign to focus on the gendered perspective of the death penalty. We cannot ignore that increasingly, statistics globally and even in the region indicate that majority of the women serving death sentence have experienced gender-based violence, psychological, physical, and even economical. In some, we are making the argument that women on death row suffer intersectional discrimination from the point of arrest, trial, and even sentencing. So we are calling and saying that a focus needs to be looked at to ensure that a gendered lens is applied in the campaign to abolish the death penalty. Although several countries in the region have abolished the death penalty, had de facto the abolitionist states, the idea that death penalty is still a form of punishment in our statute books still haunts us. So we applaud the efforts of the legislative and policy reform, not only in Kenya, but in the region. We've seen that this is also emerging. Countries like Malawi have also abolished the death penalty, and we hope that Kenya will follow suit. Additionally, we are also calling, as ICJ and other actors in the room, for the adoption of the draft protocol to the African Charter on Human and People's Rights on the abolition of the death penalty. We hope this is also one of the discussions and conversations we can have today together as we've gathered in this room. We also need to continue the support, the running call we've been called on the proposed penal code amendment. We hope that as many as civil society partners can engage during the public participation and have a campaign around that. That is our call as ICJ Kenya and all the partners in the room. Let's join hands, let's have a joint memoranda, let's put together and give our submissions on the abolishing of on why we should abolish the death penalty from our statistics. So in closing, ladies and gentlemen, I want to welcome you again on behalf of ICJ Kenya Council, on behalf of the ICJ Kenya team, wonderful team that put this together. Karibuni sana, and once again, if you have any follow-up questions for us, any questions around the ongoing cases, we're happy to engage. Karibuni sana, and have a wonderful deliberation. Asante.
Ladies and gentlemen, this not only demonstrates the torturous and archaic nature of the death penalty, but also warrants its urgent and immediate abolition as a form of punishment in our country. It is against this backdrop that I, Opiyo Wangai, MP, have sought to sponsor amendments to the Penal Code, Cap 63, laws of Kenya, and other related laws, namely the Prisons Act, the Legal Act, the Kenya Defense Forces Act, the Preservation of Act, and the Appellate Jurisdiction Act with regards to the issue of the death penalty. The nature of the amendments is to replace the death sentence with life imprisonment, of course bearing in mind the recent Court of Appeal decision in Julius Kitsao Manyeso versus Republic, which essentially has declared life imprisonment as unconstitutional, as well as the Supreme Court's decision in Francis Karioko Muratetu, which outlawed the mandatory nature of the death sentence. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm also aware of the multi-pronged concerted efforts by key players in the sector, including efforts by civil society such as ICJ Kenya, who have graciously convened us here this morning and are also doing many great things in a bid to drum support for the abolition of the death penalty. I cannot forget other efforts by key players such as the judiciary and the National Council on Administration of Justice, who have developed the sentencing policy, which is also a crucial step towards this noble goal. It is my sincere hope that all these efforts will bear fruit, and from where I sit as a legislator, I will do everything within my power to support these initiatives through legislation. I am glad to inform you this morning, ladies and gentlemen, that the Penal Code Amendment Bill has already been introduced to the floor of the House and has gone through its first reading. With your support, I am very hopeful that these amendments will indeed see the light of day, as the lives of numerous prisoners serving the death sentence depend on it. In closing, ladies and gentlemen, I echo the words of Brian Stevenson, who once said that the death penalty is a punishment shaped by the constraints of poverty, race, geography, and local politics. It is for this reason that the death sentence should therefore be dealt its final blow and be removed from our statute books for good. Ladies and gentlemen, with those few remarks, I wish you all fruitful deliberations. Shukran.
Access to justice is not necessarily guaranteed in the question of life sentences and death penalty, because you find that the persons who are currently within death row are persons who are poor, vulnerable, and marginalized, who in some cases did not have access to legal representation, which is a core fundament in the question of fair trial rights. So people do not get access to advocates. And if you don't have a clear representation strategy, you end up being actually put in prison because you did not get the right legal defense. So there's actually a violation on your right to legal representation. There is also your right to economic and sociocultural rights, being able to come into the work stream, work for your employment, being able to enjoy liberties such as housing in the community because you're deprived of liberty. So there are various fundamental rights that it does violate. But the key one that we are highlighting in this particular conversation is torture, because every human being has a right from freedom of torture, cruel and inhumane treatment. And for us, the death penalty actually perpetuates inhumane treatment, cruel treatment and torture. So that is the particular human right that we are spotlighting alongside the deprivation of the right to life. To commemorate the World Day Against the Death Penalty, the theme for this year is Death Penalty and Irreversible Torture. And this is actually an offshoot of a conversation we had 2 years ago where we identified death penalty as torture. We're going to be looking at various ways in which the death penalty violates human rights, particularly because persons in Kenya who are sentenced to the death penalty do not get executed. They end up spending their time in prison, awaiting their sentence, but it never comes. They are unable to work and actually provide for their families because death row persons do not work. So there is a sense of hopelessness, despair. Right now we know that there are heightened cases of psychosocial issues between people, and particularly this is amplified when you're in death row, because you do not know when you will be out, if you will ever be out. You do not have access to work. You do not have access to a lot of the other inmates because you are secluded by your very nature because you're on death row. So we want to amplify the question that indeed death penalty is torture. We are calling for the abolition of the death penalty. We are delighted that currently there's a bill before the National Parliament that is seeking to abolish the death penalty and replace it with life. But we're also cognizant that there is a conversation from the Court of Appeal saying that the life imprisonment is in itself unconstitutional. So what we are hoping for is a way in which you can know what is life sentence in Kenya? Is it 30 to 40 years? A very clear stipulation so that people who go in can know how long they have to serve within the prison system to be able to come back and be reintegrated in their communities. Because ideally, we are not punishing people just for the sake of it. We are punishing people because we want them to be able to appreciate that they did wrong the community, but be able to come back having reformed into that community. So that is the conversation we are having today. It is a worldwide celebration. We are glad that Kenya hasn't executed anyone since 1987, and we hope that this particular conversation and keeping an eye on this will ensure that we do not have anyone executed for as long as we are in this space.